Welcome in, everyone, to a very special episode of American Joyride. We are joined today by Jason Sweet. He's a former Air Force, PJ, Arizona Wildcats football player, and the current owner of SOCOM Athlete. Jason, thank you very much for being here.
Dave, it's a pleasure to be on here, my man. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I got to be honest, like we were just talking off camera a moment ago, you're the first ever PJ to come on the show. We've had a lot of Navy SEALs. We've had a couple of CCT guys. You're only the third Air Force guy ever, Delta guys, Rangers. So a lot of people watching this might not exactly know when they hear PJ what I'm referring to, what you're referring to. So could you give the audience a rundown of what it is when someone says, I'm an Air Force PJ? What does that mean?
Well, first of all, Dave, I'm honored to be the first PJ on your show, man. I'm humbled by it. Definitely not worthy. For those that are looking into pararescue and the PJ career field, check out some heroes like Chief Ivan Ruiz, who was awarded the Air Force Cross. Some of my boys like John Hamilton, just some heroes to me. As far as what a pararescueman is, when it comes to a pilot getting shot down or American personnel being isolated behind enemy lines or just anyone that needs to be rescued that requires expertise and skills and capabilities that no one else can do, that's where a PJ comes in. And the reason why that we are in the Air Force is because we're attached to various airframes and air platforms that allow us to infill and exfil in austere and non-permissive environments so that we can get the mission done. So some examples of pararescue missions would be something like a casualty evacuation situation in a location like Afghanistan or Africa or wherever it may be, where nobody else can fly into it, whether it be too dangerous or it requires some level of expertise that somebody else can't do. So a lot of times PJs are the last resort. And in order for us to even get called in, it's got to be the worst day of somebody's life. Some of the rescues that we do involve high angle rescue. So that would be somebody isolated on a cliff or something like that. We do ocean rescue. We do scuba missions, combat rescue, obviously, and then our bread and butter is what's called PR, and that is personnel recovery, which would be a pilot that is isolated, like we said, behind enemy lines. Pararescuemen also get attached to SEAL teams, Green Beret teams, the 75th Ranger Regiment, and a lot of people get a little confused on why the Army or the Navy and sometimes the Marine Corps would bring a PJ on their team when they have their own medics. Even though a PJ is a medic, what our bread and butter is rescue. So some of the expertise that we bring to the table may not be something that the team has. And we're going to be ready to, God forbid, somebody on that team gets shot or goes down or gets injured. We're going to keep them alive on the battlefield. We're going to call in rescue platforms to get them out of the battlefield. And we're going to ride with them all the way to the dock so that we can keep as many guns on the battlefield as possible. So in a nutshell, that's what Air Force Pararescue is, my man. We jump, we dive, we shoot, we climb mountains. We do it all that others may live. The motto of the Pararescueman. Yeah, go ahead, bud.
I say that sounds unbelievably epic. That's some alpha dog stuff you're talking about right there. That is, but with the motto, you were just about to say the motto. What is it?
The motto is these things we do that others may live. And there's about 500 PJs currently serving in the world living by that motto.
That makes you proud to be an American. I did not realize the skill set was that broad, that wide, that impressive. So we're obviously talking about an elite role, an elite unit. Did you always want to be a PJ, or did you look at other elite units like the Rangers or the SEALs or being a CCT, or did you know, hey, I want to be the guy that's going in and rescuing people from the jump?
Well, I think the SEAL teams is what attracts most people from the outside in. You know, you've got the epic missions, the movies, the books. SEAL Team 6 killed bin Laden. So the SEALs attract a lot of individuals to the special operations community. And then once you start doing your research, you can kind of find your place. But to get into why I chose pararescue, even joining the military was never really a consideration for me growing up. But my dad was a PJ, and he had a lot of influence on that decision.
Was your dad a PJ? And I know you and your dad were the first ever, correct me if I'm wrong, first ever father-son duo in special operations. Is that correct?
Well, to my knowledge, that is correct. There have been fathers and sons that have both served in the Ranger Regiment or the SEAL teams or even pararescue, but we served at the same team at the same time. But he was a PJ back in the 80s and early 90s, and then ended up re-enlisting when I was in the pipeline, man. Our pipeline is about 2.5 years. So we have to go through Air Force basic training, and as hard as that is, right? And then after Air Force basic training, you go into your selection course. Back when I went through, it was called PJ NDOC, and it was about 2.5 months long, modeled off of a school like BUDS and Special Forces Assessment and Selection. And you'd have about 120, 130 guys that started the course, and like 5 dudes would graduate, 10 dudes would graduate. And if you made it, then congratulations, now you get to go train. And then that training, first and foremost, involves combat dive school. So when my dad went through, you'd actually go through the Army's combat dive school as a PJ student, brand new dude, shaved head. When I went through, the Air Force had already created their own combat dive school. You make it through combat dive school, then you go to survival school, then you go to Army Airborne School, and then after that, you get into your medicine. So you have to go through civilian medicine, EMT basic, and then EMT paramedic, and that takes up about a year of your training. And then after you get done with that, you go to military freefall school, also known as Halo School. After you graduate Halo School, you'll go through a 6-month course called the Pararescue Apprentice Course, and that's where you really take all of that formal training and tie it in together. You learn mountaineering, how to use mechanical advantage, weapons, tactics, fast roping out of helicopters, hoisting, rappel. Then you get into your combat swimming and your open water rescue operations, and then what we call dirt medicine. And dirt medicine is like, well, in paramedic, you learn how to do things by the book, but in dirt medicine, you learn how to do things effectively, how they're used on the battlefield. You make it through that 2.5 years of training. By then, you've got like 5 classes combined and like 5 dudes left that'll graduate. You get your beret, and then you get sent off to a permanent duty station and get ready for a deployment.
When you're doing training that difficult, are most of the guys who are dropping out, is it just because they physically couldn't do it, or was it more a mental game? And the reason I asked it is, like, a lot of Rangers I've interviewed, they say as long as you realize that you can't quit, you can get through Ranger school. It's going to be tough. It's going to suck. But if you don't quit, you'll get through it. Once you've made the decision in your head, I don't want to do this, you're done. You will fail out. Was it the same way to be a PJ, where it's more of mental than it is a physical task?
Well, it's going to be both. When you get through selection, for example, our PJ NDOC course, in order to even graduate the course, you had to run 6 miles in under 44 minutes. You had to do a 3,000-meter fin swim in X amount of time. I can't remember. You had to be able to do a 50-meter underwater swim. You had to do a series of 5 knots underwater, tying it on a rope corral. We had to do things like buddy breathing, which is where you pass a snorkel back and forth for 2.5 minutes while the instructor tries to drown you. You got to be able to do X amount of pull-ups, sit-ups, push-ups, ruck marching. And so you can be as mentally resilient as you want, but if you're not a physical stud, you're not going to make it. And as a PJ, if somebody is relying on you to save their life, in the worst case scenario, they need an absolute stud physically that's coming after them. Obviously, doing things under the water, particularly, it's going to require a lot of mental resiliency. So yes, the mental side is huge, but the selection course is largely physical. And then after you get done with that, getting through something like Army Airborne School, right? That's pretty physical. But getting through a course like EMT paramedic, now that was pretty tough for a guy like me. We have a saying, get comfortable being uncomfortable, embrace the suck. Some of these things that will get you through a selection course, but learning how to get comfortable being uncomfortable in the classroom is a whole different ballgame. So that was one of the hardest parts for me in the pipeline, was when I had to really focus, pay attention, take notes, get tested on academics. And so it doesn't matter how big of a stud you are or how mentally resilient you are. There's going to be something in the PJ pipeline that's going to propose a great challenge for you. So just getting through all of that together and finally getting your maroon beret, by the time you make it, you know that you're worthy to save lives on the battlefield.
And this is something I want to touch on, because when I interviewed a pair of CCT guys, I was completely unfamiliar with what CCT guys did. I'd learned about them shortly before I did my first interview. I actually did know what PJs were even before I knew what they were. But one of the things they talked about is, like, they do a lot of shooting because they got to go in with Green Beret teams, SEAL teams, just like you're talking about. And they're expected to if a gunfight breaks out, to be excellent at that aspect of the job. Are PJs, are they doing CQB training? Are they doing a lot of gunfight training? Or is that something that's not really part of your job?
Yeah, it's a big part of the job. Combat search and rescue involves exactly what it's called. PJs also get attached to SEAL teams, Green Beret teams, as you know, and we do personnel recovery. So being able to save your patient's life often means suppressing the enemy. The first rule of TCCC is to suppress enemy fire and to fire back and to make this scene safe. Tactics and close quarter battle is not the bread and butter of pararescue, but it is a big part of the job, just like anything else. And to go back on combat controllers, if any CCT guys are listening, they really are the tip of the spear, man. Obviously, JTAC isn't something that they're going to get in their immediate pipeline. It's something that comes a little bit later. But when you've got a highly trained commando that's Halo qualified, combat dive qualified, and all of that, they're also an air traffic controller in a JTAC. There is no finer force multiplier on the battlefield than a combat controller. So I'm very honored to have to serve with some CCTs in my day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize that the Air Force has some absolute dudes in it. You know, like you said, people think about the Navy SEALs and they get all the marketing and the commercials. But I want the viewers to understand the Air Force has some absolute dogs in it. And I say that as a compliment when I use the word dogs. I mean, just elite individuals. Now, I know you did a deployment to Afghanistan. We talked about that a little bit when we were doing a little background information. When you found out you were deploying, what emotions were you going through? What were you thinking? How were you feeling? Knowing I'm fine. I did all this training. I've dedicated years to be able to have this opportunity, and now I'm going to get to go do it. What were you thinking?
Well, I joined to go to war. That's all I thought about when I was in the pipeline. I'd imagine myself on the battlefield serving honorably and go through these creative visualizations of what it would be like. And obviously nothing's going to prepare you for the battlefield like it is actually being there. But I remember being in the apprentice course and the last course I had told you about in the pararescue pipeline, and asking my proctor, his name is Tommy Pierce, he's actually a chief now. And I said, Chief, well, Tommy, at the time, how do I know that I'm ready for the battlefield? And he goes, Jay, you just got to trust your training, and you got to trust yourself, and just know that you're never going to be ready, man. You just got to go out there and do it, and you're going to perform. So I volunteered for the Afghanistan deployment. Not just me, so many guys on my PJ team volunteered that we actually had to split deployment in half because we had so many guys that were eager to go to war. My dad, like I said, re-enlisted in the PJ pipeline when I was in the apprentice course, and we ended up getting stationed at the same team at the same time. We got to go to a couple of CQB courses together, got to do some Halo jumps together, but one thing that we were not authorized to do was deploy together. So I was the guy that ended up getting the deployment. I was super excited about it. Our 3-4 months pre-deployment spin-up was one of the most incredible things I've ever done in my life, and just received training that I never imagined even existed. So by the time I got to Afghanistan, I felt ready and able to go get the mission done.
And what surprised you or shocked you the most once your feet actually hit the ground in Afghanistan?
Dude, so I got off of this C-17, and we went into this in-processing area, and in walked these 7 just haggard dudes, you know, bearded out, turbans, Afghani clothing, and they all had variations of AK-47s, AK-74s, RPKs, and you could tell that these guys just got done with battle. And I had never really been around any type of foreign fighter at that time, much less an Afghani fighter. So I just remember looking at their weapons and seeing in their eyes, and you could tell that these were warriors and that they had just been through something, and things got real quick. The ops tempo was extremely intense. You get over there and you see the intel room, You see all the helos, you see the PJs that are already there, and they're kind of giving you the handover. You get to see some of the missions that they've launched on, and you know, man, this is war. In Bastion Airfield, which is just outside of Lashkar Gah, Nadi Ali River area. This is in Helmand Province. Bastion Airfield's a British airfield that is connected to Camp Leatherneck. So there was about 11,000 Marines stationed at Camp Leatherneck when I went there. And I just could not believe how many different forces had joined together for Operation Enduring Freedom. I mean, there were Brits, Jordanians, Danes, you name it, so many different fighters. And this was called the ISAF forces. So things got real very quick, Dave.
And I know that you, I looked up your LinkedIn. We talked about this briefly, that you had received an air medal with Valor. Now, I do want to know this. I actually have a few air medals. They're not mine. Sitting in a safe right off to my left here. My uncle, after D-Day and my great uncle, after D-Day and the Korean War, he was killed in Korea, but he had a Distinguished Flying Cross and a handful of air medals. I want to get into that, but could you explain to the audience, what do you got to do to get an air medal? Like, what is an air medal? What, it's an award exclusively for the Air Force, correct?
Oh, that's correct. You have the Air Medal, and then you have the Air Medal with Valor, which is exclusively for combat situations in which a hostile enemy was involved. But I got to tell you, David, I didn't do anything special to earn that medal. I did anything that any other PJ would do, and that's just doing my job. So I was pretty surprised afterwards whenever we got put in for that medal, and was very humbled to get it.
Well, and I appreciate your humbleness. It's, you see a lot of people out there, not military people, but we seem to live in an era where everyone wants credit for absolutely everything, tiny little thing they do. It's refreshing to hear someone who speaks that way. But I do want to ask, what's the story behind the Air Medal with Valor, and what did you and your teammates do that resulted in that?
Yeah, man. I mean, shout out to the whole team. It's a huge team effort in every mission. It's not just us as the PJs, but we've got all the intel personnel that are getting live imagery of the scene, and they're in touch with the ground force commander, trying to get us as much intel on what we're going to fly into and what's going on, what the injuries are like, if we've got enemy in the area. And this is essentially 9 pieces of information that we called a 9-line that we would be provided with before we flew in the zone. So we had this little tent at Camp Bastion, and for this particular time of the deployment, I had moved on from the Guardian Angel Tactical Response Team to the Casualty Evacuation Platform. So we were attached to HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters. And these Pavehawk helicopters generally had 7 personnel flying in them. You had a pilot, you had a co-pilot, you had 2 flight engineers, which are also your gunners. You had 2 PJs and a CRO. That's a combat rescue officer. So anytime we went on a mission, we would fly in with 2 helicopters. We call that a 2-ship. And if we had enemy in the area, so line 6 of that 9 line tells you whether or not there's enemy in the area, no enemy, possible enemy, or if it says E there on the 9 line, you know that you're going to be flying into a hot LZ. So when we go into the zone, our trail bird is going to be the bird that lands. And then our lead bird is going to fly around what's called a spooky pattern and provide close air support as well as imagery if needed. Now, if we do have enemy in the area, so if line 6 says E, we're also going to request an escort. And in Helmand Province, an escort would generally be an AH-1 attack helicopter, so that's a Marine Cobra, or an AH-64 Apache. And lucky for us on that mission in particular, which I'll get into, not only did we have our helos loaded up with 50 caliber machine guns on both sides with party pack, that's a splash round, a tracer round, and an armor piercing round, but we also had access to an AH-1 attack helicopter, a Marine Cobra. So I'll never forget, man, like, people had told me this, like, when you get your first big mission, you're never going to be expecting it. And I was watching the movie Batman, and it had been a while since we had I think it had been like 6 hours or something like that. I was kind of mid-shift, and we get called on missions quite a bit, but whether or not we were actually going to go into a hot LZ, that was something that was very rare. So I was watching the movie Batman, And I had my headphones turned up, and we have these little walkie-talkies. And when you get a mission, you hear on the walkie-talkie, scramble, scramble, scramble. And we got scrambled, right? But I didn't even hear it. Pretty irresponsible of me. Had the headphones turned up so loud. But I saw our team leader sprint by the little opening doorway to this tent, and his eyes were just huge. And I saw him holding this piece of paper, and I knew something was up. So I closed the laptop, and I look out, and here are the PJs on my team scrambling out to the aircraft. So the first thing that we do is we sprint right out to the flight line. We're about 100 yards from our helicopters. And one group of guys I didn't mention earlier was the mechanics, man. I mean, the mechanics were just awesome out there. They're just masters at their craft, and they'd already have those rotors spinning before the pilots even got out there, or the PJs even got out there. So we would leave our rifles, our body armor, and radios, everything like that would already be staged in the helicopter. It's the first thing we would do when we get on shift is check all of our gear. And then in that helicopter is basically a makeshift hospital. We've got blood and packed whole red blood cells with a little inflow warmer, as well as a battery pack and a pump in case we got to administer it interosseous, which is through the bone marrow. Generally, we have a enhanced battle rifle on there, and as well as a support weapon like a Mark 48 machine gun.
Wait, so hold on, I've never heard that term before. What's an enhanced battle rifle?
An enhanced battle rifle is like a tricked out M14. Okay, so this is a .308 caliber weapon that you can put on automatic, semi-automatic, and we had a 10 times sight optics on there. So it's a long-range rifle. And then the Mark 48 is basically an M249 with a shorter barrel, 100-round drum with an EOTech sight on there. So not only do we have those 250 caliber machine guns, but my personal weapon was an M4A1 assault rifle with a 203 grenade launcher mounted on there. Then we got the Mark 48 in the EBR with the 250 cals in each bird. So when we come into the zone, not only are we bringing medicine, not only are we bringing rescue, but we're bringing a lot of firepower. So the first thing that we do when we get on that helicopter is throw our body armor on, and then the intel personnel would run out from the operations center and hand us this 9-line. And it's a pretty condensed piece of information, man. So what you see on there is what you get. And as you're flying out to the zone, Bastion's right in the middle of the desert. And then you got the Nadi Ali River down by Lashkar Gah in the Helmand River Valley. And on either side of that river, we call it the green zone because you've just got fields and fields of opium. And I don't know how accurate this is, but I've heard that around 90% of the world's black market opium supply came from Helmand Province in the Helmand River Valley, irrigated by the Nadi Ali River. So we called it the green zone. Anytime you went into the green zone, you didn't know what was going to happen. So we saw in our coordinates where we're going. We got updates that it was going to be a poppy field and that we had some British recon guys that were under fire in an active tick. One of them had been shot in the shoulder, right? So we thought we were going into a one single patient that was wounded. We knew we had enemy in the area. We requested the escort with the AH-1, and we started flying into the zone. I can't remember, but I remember it was probably between 15 and 20 minute flight time to get down to the green zone near Lashkar Gah. So we didn't have a whole lot of time to get updates and spike our IV bags or maybe get the blood going or whatever it was. If we got a good piece of intel on what the status of our patient was, like maybe they had a femoral fracture or a sucking chest wound, or they were an amputee from an IED blast. Based on that intel, we can kind of start prepping our helicopter and all that medical equipment to make sure that we're moving expediently. And we had this down to a science. But if the intel's bad, we don't necessarily know what we're getting into. So once you leave the wire, it's just all desert. You do a couple of test shots. They'll test the 50 cal. We'll pop a couple rounds from our M4. Fly with your legs hanging out the door, which is one of the things that I miss the most. And then we're going into the green zone. One of the most important pieces of information on that 9-line is the color of the smoke that's going to mark the LZ. And something interesting about that mission is, I don't know if it was Taliban or whoever our enemy was on that mission, but they tried to they tried to set us up into a fake LZ. So they popped smoke similar to where the landing zone was, but on our 9 line, it said landing zone marked by red smoke, and this was clear smoke. So we knew obviously not to fly in there. We're not going to fall for that trick. So about 15, 20-minute flight time, as I said, we see the red smoke. It's a big poppy field. We land in that poppy field. I'm on trail, so I actually get to go on the ground and fill. Our lead bird did spooky patterns and Overwatch up top. And the first thing I remember once we landed is our gunner, our flight engineer on the left side, Trevor was his name. He's like, hey man, our gun's bent. So we were down a gun. Bent means it's not functioning. So we're down a gun on the left side. Right about that time is when the AH-1 came in. Myself and a PJ named Cheney Harrison exfilled the aircraft and went into the field. It was about that time we started taking AK fire from the 9 o'clock and the 12 o'clock position. And, unlike the movies and the video games, you see where the enemy is, right? Well, here we had no idea at the time where it was coming from. You just hear noises, and we've got these Peltors on, right? And the Peltors are like your noise enhancer and your ear protection at the same time. And it's very hard to know where noise is coming from with these Peltors. So the first thing that I noticed when we were in the field was that there was a Brit that was up on a wall in this compound that was shooting directly over our heads to our 9 o'clock. So I'm thinking, okay, enemies at the 9 o'clock position. About that time, we started taking more fire. So Chandy and I dropped down in this poppy field. And at that point, I'm just like, all right, dude, like, I don't really know what to do. I don't necessarily know where to go. I don't know where the enemy fire is. Nobody knows what's going on. So I'm just going to stand by. And about 10 seconds later, I see my boy Chandy just get up and start sprinting through this poppy field. And I'm like, all right, I guess I know what I got to do. So that was Chaney's like second or third deployment. So I just followed his lead. Shortly after that, the team of these Brits came out of the wall of this compound, and there were 4 of them carrying this litter. And the guy on the litter, I mean, he was clearly deceased. And one thing I will add is on the way to the mission, the injury went from being a shoulder gunshot wound to a sucking chest wound to he was dead. Now, I don't know if the Brits kind of lied to us to get us to launch on the mission, because I don't know if we would have flew into this mission to do a body recovery. I think we probably would have waited until things had calmed out a little bit and there was less enemy in the area or whatever it may be. But we flew into the zone thinking that we were going to be able to save this guy's life. And the first thing that I noticed whenever we saw him on the litter was just complete lifelessness. Every step that they took, he was just limply falling around, and you could just tell he was dead. At that point, we started taking more fire, so the litter team took cover, and then the AH-1 actually came in and cut our lead helo off and did a hell of a gun run. Our lead bird, I don't know if it was fixed forward guns, but it sure did look like it. They did a fixed forward gun run. I've never seen such a long gun run in my life. I mean, it was absolutely exhilarating. I mean, there's nothing like the firepower that the Air Force can bring to the battlefield. And this guy who was flying lead bird, his name was Colonel Reynolds, and he was a full bird colonel, an Alabama boy who used to be an F-15 pilot. So he was trying to get some as much as he could on this mission, man, swooping in, putting guys' butts off the floor on a quick gun run pattern. It was just incredible. And this all happened in a matter of a couple minutes. So once they started suppressing the fire, we had the ability to start moving towards the helo. I basically just stood by this litter team, man, and they loaded up the patient into the helicopter, and we started getting to work on him. I mean, even though he was passed, like, our protocol and our operating procedures is that we're going to give these guys everything that we got all the way to the hospital. So we immediately started CPR on him. We immediately started pushing blood through an interosseous infusion. So we had this thing called an easy drill. And when you're in shock, your veins don't really show. Your blood flow and your blood pressure is decreased. And so you're not going to see like that big antecubital vein right there in the inner elbow that you usually see. So we got this easy drill. We just drill straight into the humeral head and the shoulder. And then we go ahead and hook up our wide tubing, our packed whole red blood cells, and we start pushing that blood. And that blood is what really will save your life. And In a PJ, in a situation like this, like generally we're not going to be the one that's going to save your life. We're going to be the one that's going to postpone death. And then we get you to a doc. He's going to do some emergency surgery on you, and that's what's going to save your life. So we put oxygen on him. We put a blanket on him to keep him warm. You'd be surprised at how many people die of shock just because they can't heat regulate. We pushed blood on him. We gave him an endotracheal tube and started pushing that oxygen straight to his lungs. I mean, we gave him everything that we had, man, all the way till the changeover, and he was deceased. So that was mission 0427 Alpha. So April 27th of 2012. I'll never forget the day. And that was my first combat mission, man.
That was your first time ever in combat, and that was the first time ever.
That was the first time ever, man. I mean, I had done a couple missions like at night where there was like some Afghan interpreter that had hit an IED, and the Special Forces group had taken him to a forward operating base and made sure there was no enemy. And we flew in at night, evacuated him. We went to a little pickup for a Marine that had been shot up, and that was near an opium field too, little poppy field. But we didn't get any enemy fire. These were just kind of routine missions where you fly in, pick up a guy, fly out, hand him over to the dock, and you're done. You're on alert again. And this was the first time that I had ever experienced combat. So shout out to the whole team, man. Everything from the mechanics, the intel operators, the flight engineers, the pilots for having the courage to fly into a zone like that and put all their lives at risk. The Brits on the ground. Just everything involved in that mission, man. You know, it's truly a humbling experience.
I'm at a loss for words. The amount of chaos you just casually laid out in a 5-minute span, just detailed like that. I think the average person listening to this right now is going to think, what the hell did I just hear? I mean, that's pure chaos. And you talk about it like you were just another day at the office, another day at the office. Do you attribute that level of, kind of analytical assessment to the training you receive, or is that just your personality?
Dave, man, like I'm gonna give it to the training. I grew up in team sports. I was a pitcher in college beforehand, so I know what it's like to be under pressure. And I played some football, and I've been in some crazy situations, gotten some fights, got kicked out of school a couple times, but nothing will really prepare you for being the voice of order in chaos like pararescue training. And just shout out to all the incredible instructors that we had. I mean, at the PJ NDOC course, I had mentioned Ivan Ruiz earlier. He's a true hero, a PJ who's really done some combat missions. He was one of my instructors at NDOC. We had a guy named Mr. Newman, Superhuman Newman. We had a guy named Ted Ryla, Mike Maroney, just some really awesome, gritty dudes that made us tough. And then, of course, you go into the rest of the pipeline and PJ Medicine and having guys like Tommy Pierce and Lopaka Mounts and just men like that have been doing the job and had already deployed. I mean, they just they got us ready, man. So, getting something like an air medal with Valor, it's just it's humbling because that any PJ you'd like to think would have done that. You're replaceable by anybody, and it's not just you who was out there. It's your family, it's all your instructors, it's everyone who prepped you to that moment. So if it was up to me, everyone would get the medal.
Yeah, I love that attitude. That's such a team first attitude. That is so awesome to hear. This is a question I ask just about everyone I interview, and it's a great segue off of this story, your first time in combat. I just interviewed a guy a couple of weeks ago. He's former Delta Force dude, was in the unit for a long time. He gave an answer that a lot of people have given, a lot of operators have. And I'm going to tell you what he said, then I'm going to get your thoughts. But essentially, that war is addicting. And that when you leave war and you leave the battlefield, you can never get that feeling. For him, you never get that adrenaline rush ever again in your life. And it's a craving that you just can't get rid of. And I've heard that from more guys than I can count, but I've heard other people say, I never felt that way. For you personally, do you look back at your time on deployment, man, and think to yourself, that was such a euphoric rush or such a incredible feeling knowing I was doing something amazing? Or to you, do you look at it like, hey, that happened, that was a great part of my life, but I can put that behind and I've moved on?
For me, it was an unquenchable thirst, man. That's where I felt like I belonged there. which is why whenever I transitioned out of the military, I ended up going into college football. You know, you can't compare college football to war, but you are on a football field with guys that are trying to take your head off. It's a combat sport. You know, you're smashing into other guys, you know, as hard as you possibly can. And that was a good transition for me. But it just did not satisfy or quench the thirst as much as real deal combat did. And, you know, I wasn't even in a combat situation like most of these guys and these Delta Force operators that you're mentioning. I ran through a poppy field with my team, escorted some Brits to a litter, let some helicopters suppress enemy fire, and got back on the helicopter, right? So my experience in combat, you know, in all humility, doesn't even compare to a lot of these guys. But even that experience, yes, I to this day thirst and lust for combat.
Oh, I love that. That's such an incredible quote. But you brought up football, and I'm so excited to talk about this. You're one of the few guys who've appeared on the show who was in the military and also an athlete. Second football player, Nate Boyer, former Green Beret, also appeared, and a very, very nice guy. Connor Matthews, the MMA fighter, was the other one. He was a CCT.
Yeah. Nate's a stud. Connor's a stud. Shout out to you, Connor.
Yeah. So when you go from being an Air Force PJ, how do you end up playing football at the University of Arizona for the Wildcats when you were coming out of the Air Force?
Well, yeah, man. So a lot of PJs end up going into medicine, whether it be like a physician's assistant or a doctor. And there's a lot of guys out there like Dave Glass and Chris Peterson and Josh Apple, Josh Johnston, just total studs, way more badass than I, that have paved the way of becoming doctors. So in pararescue, we have 5 or 6 reserve/National Guard teams where you can be a full-time guy on that team or you can be a part-time guy on that team. You have to maintain all of your skills, your halo, your situational medical exercises, all of your AIEs like fast rope, rope ladder, rappel, scuba, flight hours, all of that, so that you're deployable and ready for a mission, but you can do the job part-time and pursue something else. So a lot of guys, when they got back from a deployment, they would use their post 9/11 GI Bill to get their bachelor's and then apply for medical school and kind of take their medicine to the next level. So that's what I thought that I was going to do. I got back from a combat tour. I got promoted to staff sergeant, got the rescue team leader qualification, and checked the boxes of what I enlisted to do. Prayed a lot about it, and that's where God led me back into college. So I didn't test into a high enough math to even get into the University of Arizona, man. So I had to start off at this community college, Pima Community College. So I was using tuition assistance, still kind of working full-time as a PJ while transitioning to reserve status and knocking out the very beginning steps to get into medical school. So I had to do like pre-algebra again. They called it intermediate algebra. And then I had to go back. I had to do college algebra and then take general chemistry 151, general biology 181, some other electives and things like that. And started taking them at a community college. And like I said earlier, I was on a baseball scholarship before I enlisted in the Air Force. And so Huya never quit. I figured I'd give baseball another shot. I'm like, hey, man, I've given my arm like a 5-year rest here. I'm bigger, stronger, more athletic than I've ever been. I know about human performance, mobility, how to take care of my body. My mindset's stronger. I think I'm going to go back and give this a shot. And so I walked on the Pima Community College baseball team, and they liked having me on the team, man. But I didn't have the gift that I used to have. My fastball was like 84 miles an hour. Like that'll cut it in high school, but not at the collegiate level, not even the community college level. And half the dudes on this team were studs that didn't want to get locked down in a 4-year university for 3 years before they go into the draft. You go to community college, you can go right into the draft. So a lot of these guys are what we call draft and follow. So I wasn't getting a whole lot of playing time. I wasn't effective. And I decided to walk away from the baseball team. I wouldn't really consider it quitting, but it was the first thing in my life that I ever walked away from. You know, I told the coach, hey, man, you know, I could be working full-time as a PJ. I could be focused on my academics, but I'm sitting out here twiddling my thumbs in the bullpen as a backup pitcher for 4 or 5 hours a day, man. It's just not the best use of my time. I gave it a shot. I'm going to move on. So I finished my associate's degree at Pima Community College, and shortly before Afghanistan is actually when I met my wife now, Jessica. And I remember being at Jessica's house, and like I was in her kitchen, just like cooking some food, and her roommate Dana was dating this guy on the football team. He was a backup running back named DJ. And I remember talking to DJ and stuff, and just one day I just thought, dude, my dream since I was a little kid was to play big time college football. That's what I always wanted to do, but I wasn't big enough, fast enough. I went to a little high school. You can't play traveling football. I mean, now they have like 7-on-7 teams and stuff like that, but traveling baseball is the only reason why I even got exposure to any scouts. So I remember talking to DJ a little bit about it and kind of looking in the mirror and saying, hey, dude, you're 210 pounds now. You're bigger, you're faster, you're stronger than you've ever been. Why don't you give this dream a shot? So shortly after I got my associate's degree, I transferred over to the University of Arizona, majoring in biochemistry. And I talked to my commander about my plans. And he's like, dude, I support you 100%, man. Go chase your dreams. So I went and I got a speed coach. And his name was Connor. And Connor and I worked together for about 4 or 5 months. And he had to teach me how to be a football player, how to be a runner, because I was a stiff white boy who didn't know how to open up my hips, didn't have any footwork, and just didn't even know how to run a 40-yard dash effectively. So he really took me from the bottom and groomed me and worked with me. And I ended up getting my 40-yard dash time down from a 5 flat to a 4.6 second 40-yard dash, which, I mean, that's NFL level for a linebacker. Not saying that I was ever NFL material, but I got pretty fast.
That's fast for a linebacker.
I got pretty fast, man. I jumped a 31-inch on the vertical at the little combine that we did, had a pretty good 5.10.5 shuttle, and I had gotten up to about 220 pounds. So at that point, I knew just by tangibles, just by metrics, that I could probably make the U of A football team. So the tryout finally happened. It was in the spring. This would be March of 2014. And I went out there, and the scouts out there were pretty straightforward with us. They're like, hey, guys, we're looking for speed. You know, you guys are big, strong, whatever it is. We're looking for speed on this team. We want guys that we can mold. We need speed. This is Pac-12 football. So I'm like, roger that, man. I'm running a 4.6, you know, just kind of feeling a little bit cocky inside. Well, I go out there and I run a 5 flat, and I got cut. And this broke my heart, dude. So at that point, I had a little TDY that I volunteered on. I was still a reservist PJ, full-time student. And this TDY was to go to a rescue jump master school down at Cocoa Beach. Patrick Space Force Base is what it's called now. It used to be Patrick Air Force Base before the Space Force came into existence. But I went down there for this jump master training. And I told some of the PJs down there about what happened. And there were a bunch of football buffs. You know, Florida, it's in the Southeast. People love our football down here in Florida. So these guys were like, Jay, you're meaning to tell me that you put in 6 months of work on this. You were running a 4.6. You had one bad day and you're just giving up on your goals? That's not you, Jay. Like, you're going to come out here every morning. We're going to play ultimate football, and we're going to set up 40-yard dash cones for you, and we're going to get your 40 time back down. And there was a guy named Chief Rob Ziegler who did this with me. And may he rest in peace, Carl Enos, my boy. He'd go out there too. And Bill Posh, may he rest in peace as well. And for our listeners out there, Carl and Bill and a guy named Mark Weber, as well as the pilots, co-pilot and flight engineers, passed away in a helicopter crash March 15th, 2018, call sign Jolly 51. And Carl Enos is actually the first guy that I ever mentored and ever worked with. So that cut pretty deep when he passed away in 2015. But to rewind back to it, these guys set up cones for me, man. And like, I just remember just not really getting the 40-yard dash times that I wanted. I got back in the gym while I was down there, just really trying to get back in football shape just after 3-4 months of kind of putting it on the shelf. And I was running like 4.9s out there, like 4.91, 4.92. I'm just like, dude, I'm going to get cut. And I get back to Tucson, and the tryout's supposed to be in August, like 2 weeks before the season starts. But not enough dudes were going to show up to the tryout. Had signed up. And so they postponed the tryout to September, like 2 games into the season. I'm just like, all right, man, that sucks, but that's just more time for me to train and get that 40-yard dash time back down. So I finally got the tryout, man, and I went out there and I ran a 4.76. Not my fastest time, but I did all right. Did okay in the footwork drills, did okay in one-on-ones, knocked a couple tight ends down and covered a couple running backs, show them what they needed to see. And this little dude who was their head recruiter, his name's Matt Dudek, he comes up to me and he's like, not bad. We'll give you a call if we pick you up. And I'm just like, oh boy, So I'm sitting in biology class, man, and class it had just ended. Like they must have known my schedule or something. I mean, we're talking like 3 seconds after the class ended. I get a phone call from the Arizona football office. And I'm like, well, they wouldn't be calling me if I got cut, right? So I pick it up and there's Dudek. He's like, hey, man. He goes, if you don't give 100% at every practice, I'm going to cut your ass just as quick as we got you on the team. Welcome to University of Arizona football. And dude, I had imagined, no different than imagining combat when I was in the pararescue, but you have this like imagination of what it's going to be like. And I'd always imagined what it would be like when I got that call. And I thought I would be jumping for joy and like celebrating, but it was so surreal and it was so real and kind of past due for me. I'd almost given up on the goal that it was almost unemotional. And I just knew like, dude, it's game time. Like it's time to get down to business. And I went in the locker room, man, and there's my locker with my name already on it. And right next to me is Scooby Wright, All-American, and Derek Turi, just these phenomenal linebackers. And they'd end up picking me up as a weak side linebacker. I was pretty undersized for a backer, and I was a running back in high school. So they're not going to put me at running back. So that's where they put me, man. And I got to go over to the equipment area, and it kind of reminded me of my first day on the PJ team, man. I just got all this equipment and all this gear and all this U of A swag, hoodies and sweatsuits and shorts and 4 pairs of cleats, and got to choose all the different face masks for my helmet and just all of this stuff, man. It was just amazing. And one cool thing about getting on the football team is you got access to the facilities anytime with your card. So you just come up and you tap it against the door, man. You walk out into the football stadium anytime you want. You go into the training room anytime you want, the film room, the academic room, the locker room, the weight room. And I just lived at this place. And I just remember telling myself, dude, like this is going to be very temporary in your life. So you need to soak it up and just take it all in. And man, that's exactly what I did. So that's how I ended up getting on the U of A football team.
And you were on the team when they won a Pac-12 title, right?
Well, we won the Pac-12 South championship, and then we ended up playing, because they had split the Pac-12 into 2 divisions, and then we ended up playing Oregon in the Pac-12 championship. We beat them earlier that season when they were undefeated, and they just crushed us in the Pac-12 South championship. But we won 10 football games that year and were eligible for a big BCS bowl game. So we ended up going to the Fiesta Bowl, ranked 10th in the country, playing against number 12, Boise State. And this was the best, some say, the University of Arizona's football team had ever been. The only team that even came close to us was in 1996, I believe. So this is the first bowl game we had been to in a while. Definitely the first BCS bowl game that we had been to in a while. And it was just an honor to be on that team. I got a little playing time on kickoff and kickoff return, so I didn't see the field very much, but did get to see the field, did get on the depth chart, and really got to enjoy that experience, man. It was just an honor.
Did guys on the team, because you must be what? You're in your mid-20s at this point, late 20s?
I'm 34 now, my man. So this was, I walked.
No. I'm saying that. Yeah. I meant when you were at Arizona.
Yeah, I was like, thanks, Dave. How flattering, bro. I walked on at 26, man. So, I mean, I wasn't necessarily like the old man on the team, but I was definitely one of the older guys on the team for sure.
So did young guys on the team, did they kind of treat you a little differently? Because they're like, hey, that guy, he went to war. That guy, he's been around the block a time or two. He's older than us. Or was it like you were just anyone else on the squad?
Well, that's the way it was at first, right? But I wanted to be one of the boys. And so I devoted a lot of time into building relationships with my teammates and getting to know them and breaking past those cultural barriers, if any. And I ended up making some of the best friends I've ever had on that football team, man. And so yes and no. Yes in the beginning, but no after a few weeks. We were a family, and I was hanging out with these guys during class, after class, in between classes, going out with them for victory parties afterwards, man, helping them with their homework, giving them life advice, giving them rides, just hanging out, loving life. And and they work with me too on becoming a better football player and all of that, man. So I really cherish my time, building relationships with guys like Samaji Grant and Nick Wilson and Scooby Wright and just all these dudes on the team, man.
It's so epic. That is so cool. Like I said, you're the third athlete military crossover. And it's neat because you got to play on, like you said, Arizona, maybe the greatest team they ever had. Arizona's football team, unfortunately, for huge college football guys, you can see from the helmet sitting right behind me, has unfortunately dropped off. Who was the head coach in 2014?
Dude, I played for Rich Rod.
That's
world famous coach. Yeah, infamous too. But I tell you what, man, like when it comes to the outside looking in at Rich Rod, he's screaming on the field, making all these faces, throwing his stuff everywhere. I'm going to tell you, man, when it came to being off the field, I have never met a more approachable coach. I mean, he was a hugger. He was soft-spoken, a gentle person, a player's coach. But, man, as soon as you get in those lines, he's an absolute dog. And I love Rich Rod for that. And his phrase for the team was hard edge. And he was all about just smacking you in the mouth. And I felt like I fit in perfectly on that football team. And not to be a buzzkill, but in order for me to really get any chance at getting a starting spot, I had to work out 3 times a day, man. We're talking like extra work in the morning and extra work in the evening on top of all the stuff that we were doing. I had catching up to do. These boys, they went straight from high school football to college football. I was training for war. And all of a sudden, I'm in football. And I'm also majoring in biochemistry. So when it come down to me trying to achieve my goals on this football team, man, I had to put in so much effort and I overworked myself. And a lot of times that's my downfall is being mentally stronger than I am physically. And unfortunately, there was a day that we were in the gym and overworked myself, blew out my ACL and my meniscus, and that led to a downward spiral that ended my football career.
Damn, that is really unfortunate. That sucks. What'd you do? Were you just playing basketball or something?
Dude, we had mandatory cardio and the whole team went and played basketball. And it's funny because I couldn't dunk in high school, but I could just dunk whenever I was playing football at the U of A. So I went up for this fast break dunk and I got fouled and I came down, and I've never been injured like this before. Like I've broken 9 fingers and broken bones and had several concussions, but I'd never torn a tendon or a ligament before. And I knew right away, like, it was over, man. I started tearing up. I told my teammates, like, guys, I just tore something, man. And I'll never forget what it was like going to the doctor and experiencing that. And that was about it, man. And life really kind of went downhill from me for there, because this family and this mission is what helped me transition out of the military. And I'm sure you've heard of special operators having a really tough time making that transition, whether it be that thirst for combat or whether it be just a lower ops tempo or being around people that you don't feel understand you, which they don't, but these types of things can make it really hard. So that was tough on me, man. And it was just about that time when I got married too. So the U of A, they took care of me, they rehabbed me, and I was very grateful for that. But then it was time to focus on academics. So I ended up really focusing on getting that degree in biochemistry and finishing strong and being the first Swede to ever earn his bachelor's degree.
And the first member of your family to get a bachelor's degree is also, I mean, you just run down a checklist of impressive accomplishments.
Well, no, not the first one of my family, man.
Oh.
My granddad was a nuclear physicist. He's a brainiac. But on dad's side, man, we all come from the cornfields of Ohio there. So definitely honored to get that bachelor's degree, man. I mean, getting a degree in biochemistry, it's not easy for anyone. But for me, that was the hardest thing the hardest challenge I've ever had.
Even more difficult than being in war as a PJ.
That came natural, man. But what didn't come natural was staying up all night long, studying molecules and chemical reactions and just force feeding yourself knowledge and then going and getting tested on it for 4 straight years, man. That's not who I am. So yeah, it was the most challenging thing I've ever done, man. Talk about making myself uncomfortable to get the mission done. But when you come back from an experience like Afghanistan, before I went into the military, If I were to have an exam the next day or something like that, man, and I'm studying and I start getting tired, my mindset would be, well, it sucks and I'm not going to do that great on the exam. I got to get to sleep. Versus I come back from Afghanistan, it sucks. I'm not going to be able to sleep tonight. I got to get an A on this freaking test, right? So I did what it took to get the mission done.
I love it. I love it. Now let's close out here with SOCOM Athlete. I want to dive into this with you. SOCOM Athlete's your company. I poked around the website. Obviously, it's very performance-based. I know that we had talked about it a little bit before going into this. Walk the audience through what SOCOM Athlete is, the goal of it, why you started it, and just kind of the whole thing. Because it's geared towards guys who want to get into, like, become operators, get that peak physical skill. And I'm very curious how that all goes.
Yeah, man. So the tip of the iceberg is we're a one-stop shop to equip individuals with all the tools and resources they need to be successful in special operations training. Whether you want to be a SEAL, a PJ, MARSOC, TACP, combat control, whatever it may be, you come to our program and we're going to help set you up for success. Versus the base of that iceberg is we're spearheading recruiting for the United States military with a 1-2 punch. The first punch is to provide social media advertising and promotions through our platform. We got about 400,000 followers on TikTok, a couple 100,000 on Instagram, and our audience are individuals that are interested or in special operations or whatever it may be. So if you're a recruiter and you want to get the word out there, we're the platform that's going to do it for you. Versus the 2-punch, we run an event called Hell Day, and Hell Day is a 12-hour immersive experience of what it would be like in a course like Navy SEAL Buds or Air Force Pararescue Indoc or Special Forces Assessment Selection. We're going to put you through that in 12 hours. But instead of trying to kick your ass and get you to quit the whole time, we're going to mentor you and help you through the day. But in order to even become a part of this program, you got to be a U.S. citizen. You got to be at least 16 years old. And you've got to sign that you are pursuing a career in special operations. So we're not just taking anyone out here for a challenge or for an experience. We're taking guys that want to be warriors. So we provide a couple different services. Service number 1 would be, like I said, the Hell Day events. Number 2 is we have these group chats all around the country, and it's free to be a part of these group chats. A lot of guys like myself, we didn't have anyone to train with, or we didn't really have anyone that understood us or was going for the same type of goal before we went in the military, and that can be pretty tough. So these group chats, if you live in San Antonio or Northwest Florida or Southern California or Mid-Atlantic region or Arizona or whatever it may be, all you got to do is get on the website. You apply to be in one of these group chats, show your ID, consent that you're training for special operations, fill out a couple questions, and boom, you're in a group chat with 30, 40 other studs that have the same goal as you. A lot of our guys, I'd say around 250 to 300, have come through this program and are now special operators. And a lot of those guys are in these group chats now, come out to my events to mentor. So this is like a cycle that just keeps going, man.
And do they send recruiters to your event? Like, do they have or military recruiters there just so that they can talk to these individuals right on site, make their pitches right there when they have a nice isolated group of people, or is that not something they do?
No, yeah, man, that's the business model that we're working on, and that's the future of this program, and that's the future of recruiting. We actually just got our first 1-year government contract with National Guard Special Forces recruiting, because those guys are searching far and wide for people not only that are capable to do the job, but people that are interested in doing the job. So you put a recruiter and a media person from the Army National Guard Special Forces program, partner them up with SOCOM Athlete, and we're going to promote that career field on our social media platform and traffic tons of leads their way. And whether those leads turn out into enlistments and actually get that Special Forces contract, that's going to be on them. The ball's in their court. But then you come out to the Hell Day events, you got 40 studs out there that are all crushing a fitness test and that are eager to get on the battlefield, eager to be a special operator. And you put a real deal Green Beret in uniform in front of them and mentor them for 12 hours and tell them how much they love the job, present that to them. And then you got a recruiter over here dangling that carrot. My man, there's going to be 5, 6, 7 dudes that sign on the dotted line right there on the spot. So instead of wasting time as a recruiter paying $50,000 to go hang out at halftime show at an Alabama football game where like 3 people sign up for interest, you can come out to our event for a fifth of the cost and just get a gold mine of recruits. So that's the future for this program, man.
It sounds like a genius business model when you think about it. I mean, you're serving obviously a very narrow, specific thing they want. You have access to it and they want it. It's fast. What the guys who come to the SOCOM Athlete, you said you got to be 16, but if you had to guess, what's like the average age? Is it seniors in high school, young kids in college? What would be the average age of a SOCOM athlete?
Yeah, man, when you average it out, it's going to be about 21 years old. But we've always got a few of those guys that, they're in their early 30s and they know like, hey, man, I've always wanted to do this. The window's closing. I need to get out there and start the journey, see how I stack up, get some mentorship and get some guidance on the next steps. But I really like these kids coming out when they're 16, 17, 18 years old, where we can get them early and help mold them and develop some of the mindset, some of the physical traits, the teamwork, the leadership that's going to make them successful. And as you know, man, whether it be something like the cell phone or just isolation or whatever it is, our generation is becoming less and less capable of doing these jobs. So that's where we come in to get these guys early, get them FaceTime with operators, help them pick out some of their weak points so that they can go home and know what to work on.
Yeah, well, number one, I agree 100% what you just said about isolation. I'm 30 years old, so I'm not that much younger than you are, only a couple years. And we talk about this all the time at work. Like, it seems like the cell phone has just destroyed so much of what kids want to do. And to your point, like, that's not good. You got to get people among other people. You got to get them outside, get them into things they're interested in. That alone is a noble cause. And little sidebar. But anyways, yeah, so tell people where they can find you at if they're interested.
Yeah, man, check us out on Instagram, SOCOM Athlete. Check us out on our website, SOCOMathlete.com. I run a podcast called Send Me. We've had some similar guests, some mutual guests on the podcast. Give it a listen. Check out our group chats. And, of course, check out our Hell Day events, guys. We'd love to have you out.
Well, Jason, I can't thank you enough for hopping on this episode of American Joyride. This has been an absolutely phenomenal podcast. And I hope everyone checks you out, checks your social media. And I got to say, I love the energy you bring. You bring such a calm but high-level energy. I mean, it's badass. There's really no other way to say it. So it was very, very neat getting to do this. I look forward to it, and you did not disappoint.
Dave, thanks for having me on, man. It's a true honor. Hope you have a great rest of your day, brother.